Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. My name is Dean Jones, the Well-Seasoned Librarian. We are in Season 2, Episode 12. I want to tell you about my conversation with Leticia Ann Clark. She is a wonderful cookbook writer and artist, and I really had a wonderful time talking with her. I think you're going to enjoy the conversation too. I often feel very comfortable talking to some other authors that I speak with on the podcast, and Leticia is no exception. She's a very natural conversationalist, and it felt like I was talking to an old friend. I want to encourage you very much to read her cookbooks. They're wonderful works of art, literally very carefully crafted and written, with gorgeous recipes in them that make you want to just rush out and buy wonderful seafood and produce and pasta to cook yourself. And I think you'll find them very inspirational. And I think it's the perfect thing if you live in an area where it gets cold in the winter to kind of curl up with one of her cookbooks on a cold day with a nice cup of hot coffee or wine and read them, and it'll make you dream of summertime and beautiful Mediterranean weather. Leticia Ann Clark is originally from Devon, England, and she trained at the Leiths School Food and Wine after agreeing a Master's of English Literature. After she graduated, she worked in London restaurants, as well as cooking for events, weddings, and market stalls and pop-ups. She had ones called Buns and Puns, I believe. And her illustration works have been featured in PPC, Code, the Evening Standard and Waitrose. And her recipes and writing have been featured in The Guardian, Elle, Conde Nast Traveller, Waitrose, Olive, The Times, Financial Times, The Telegraph, The Sunday Times, Sunday Brunch, The New York Times, and more. Very prolific. In 2017, Leticia moved to Sardinia and began writing, drawing, and cooking full-time, as well as teaching English. Her first book is called Bitter Honey, Recipes and Stories from the Island of Sardinia, and that was published in April of 2020. This year, her second book, La Vita e Dolce, a celebration of sweet things, inspired by Italy, was published in June 2021. Both of them are available on Amazon, and we have links on the bio, so check that out, and definitely check the books out. Amazon has some very spectacular photographs, and it shows some image pages to give you an idea of what is presented in the books, and I think you'll find them very engaging. Check out her website as well. At the very least, look at her beautiful artwork and illustrations. I think you'll be enchanted as I have been. So, without further ado, I want to take you to the conversation. Again, I really enjoyed talking with Leticia about her work, and it was a very fun conversation. And on we go. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. This is Dean Jones, and I'm here today with Leticia Ann Clark. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Now, I just want to comment first off, I don't think this is in the list of questions. It's not really a question, but God, I love your artwork so much. I just really am very enamored of your work. I think that you're just a great artist. One of your prints for sale is of a fish, and I must have it someday. I really love it. I love your work very much.
Thank you. Is it maybe it's the anchovy one? Is it just a single anchovy?
Yeah. It's perfection. I love it very much.
Thank you. No, I have a long-standing love of anchovies, so I'm always painting them, cooking them, eating them, doing anything I can with them. I actually hatched a little children's book idea a few years ago that was all about an anchovy that had lost his way from his tin and was trying to find his way home. So
I love that.
The obsession goes deep.
I will help you market that book if you ever make it.
Yeah, if we ever find a publisher, you can help me, because Alberto the Anchovy, as he was called, he's definitely been put on the back burner. I'm not sure there's a place for him in the world yet, but maybe we can find one.
I know people that have connections at Pixar. I actually work next to Pixar, so maybe we can get you. We have little action figures and a film in the works.
Oh wow! Can you imagine if Alberto the Anchovy made it to the big screen? I mean, I think I could die. I could die happy.
He'll have his own ride at Disneyland.
Well, there is no fish. I mean, is there a fish hero character in anything? I feel like fish have been underexplored.
Little Nemo.
Well, it was Nemo.
Yeah,
There's
Nemo's
Nemo.
about it. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
just really good. That's a good one. I like that one. So I, I'm sorry. I've been enjoying talking to you so much. I forgot why. Oh, that's right. We're having a conversation about your books. That's right. Okay. Um, so you work as a chef, and you've worked as a chef with food. What kind of work? Where did you get your instruction to work with food and be a chef? Because I know you started out with, is it Buns and Puns?
Puns and buns, yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of, I mean, food has always been a big part of my life. I had that sort of classic grandmother story. I think almost every chef or anyone that likes to cook generally inherits that from a grandmother
Oh
somewhere
yeah.
along the line. And I had a very brilliant cook, grandmother. My grandmother was a brilliant cook, and she kind of inspired in me a love for food, and especially kind of she was an incredibly innovative cook. She used to sort of just make things up, and she was quite slapdash. She was quite kind of scruffy and frantic, and I sort of loved that imperfection about it. She wasn't very precise, and she didn't really follow recipes. And she, there were plenty of disasters, but there were also a lot of successes, and it sort of made the successes more poignant, obviously, because there were the disasters as well. And she was just a very kind of eccentric and fascinating person, and I loved watching her cook, and I loved eating with her. And she was also very greedy, which I think is a really important thing. I mean, to cook food and be interested in food, you really have to like eating food. And I've never met anyone that was so greedy, and she was a kind of bizarre mixture of a real stickler for table manners and for sort of politeness and etiquette, but then at the same time, she would encourage you to lift up your bowl and lick the remains, or like suck on your bones. If you didn't suck your bones dry, she was furious because she thought it was a waste. And it was such a sort of funny contradiction between how kind of sort of neat and proper and prim she was about table manners, but at the same time, if you didn't drink the rest of your cereal milk from the bowl, then she would be horrified. So she was a really kind of amazing character to have, and a real inspiration. And then I studied English literature at uni, and I sort of wasted all my time. Well, not wasted perhaps, but I procrastinated by cooking, because I sort of was supposed to be reading and studying, obviously, and instead I just ended up cooking and reading cookbooks. So then I thought, when I graduated, perhaps I could do something with it properly. So I worked in a pub for a bit, and kind of just got some rough and ready instruction, sort of Anthony Bourdain style, kind of learning on the job with a very angry chef who taught me quite a lot, but threw a lot of plates and pans in the process. And then I thought, well, actually, maybe I should do this properly. So I signed up to cookery school in London and trained at Leiths, which is a very good cookery school in London, sort of French, mostly kind of classic French influence. And I did the diploma course there, and then I went to work in lots of restaurants in London before I finally ended up leaving and moving to Sardinia. So yeah, that was kind of my chefing career.
So tell me about your work as an illustrator as well. We mentioned your artwork earlier, talking about your work, but what have you done as an artist? Where did you kind of like pick up the knack to draw? Did you always draw since you were a kid, or did you pick it up later?
Well, I loved drawing, and I sort of, it was always a bit of a toss up between whether to study English or art at university. And I would have loved to go to art college, but sadly, we only have one life. And I was sort of ended up thinking that art would be harder to turn into some kind of job, which is obviously ridiculous, because English is just as hard to turn into some kind of job.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, well, I don't want to be a sort of impoverished artist struggling for the rest of my life, so I'll do English, and then maybe I can do something else with it. So I studied English, but then I always tried to keep up the drawing on the side. And when I was working in kitchens, the illustrations became a sort of light relief for the incredibly stressful hours and the sort of lifestyle and just the sort of sense of humor, I think, that you get when you work in kitchens, because I guess it's a bit like being in the war or something. Like, it's such a stressful environment that you become incredibly silly, and like your sense of humor, it sort of regresses, and you find, like anything, just constantly laughing at carrots that are vaguely phallic, or like anything, you know, that's just like anything that can be diverting and a little bit kind of distracting. And so I think I found a lot of inspiration in just silly phrases or names of vegetables or things that I liked, and I would write them down and squirrel them away, and then I would turn them into an illustration when I finally had a day off, or whatever it was. And I've tried to sort of keep that up, and I've moved a bit more into it. Initially it was all kind of nonsense and puns and things, because I loved nonsense and word games and all that kind of stuff. I'm a kind of collector of words. So it was always originally based around that, and then I've moved into kind of just paintings, sort of straightforward paintings of beautiful vegetables or fruit or fish or things that I love, and things that kind of catch my eye with the colors. And that's one of the things about living in Italy, I think, is the colors of things are so different, and so sort of specific to, you know, hot climate, like the amazing purples of the aubergines, and those sort of incredible colors in an artichoke and all that kind of stuff. And it's sort of begging to be turned into painting. So that's definitely become a bit more of an influence as well. But yeah, I never do as many or as much as I want to. And I'm always thinking, you know, I haven't done any drawing for ages. I must sit down and do some drawing. But yeah, sadly, there's only so much time in every day. But yeah, it's still something I hope I'll always keep up.
Well, I mean, Bitter Honey and La Vita e Dolce, both of them have such a beautiful look to them. I mean, they're gorgeously done, and the food photography is exceptional. Did you have a kind of hand in directing that, or did they just kind of take over and do the whole thing? I always want to know, because I'm very interested in publishing behind the scenes. That's why I ask.
Oh God, you've opened up a can of worms here, because I could talk about this for about 20 hours, literally. I mean, there's so much to say, because it's also, you know, it's a learning process for me, and obviously, you know, I'm learning as I go along and figuring out what I really want to do with it and how much freedom I can have as an author, and luckily with my publishing company, I have been given a lot of freedom. So I did do quite a lot of sort of, I wouldn't say directing, because there is obviously a designer that we work with, but you know, it's a very much a process, sort of combined process. And I'll say to her, I want these 3 pictures to sit on the same page because the colors complement each other. And I think the thing is, at the end of the day, you know, it's my experience that we're translating into a book. And I think, you know, the designer or whoever it is probably in a different country, in an office somewhere, and this book has to portray a place and the things that are very specific to that place, and the colors and the scenes and the architecture and the vegetables and the produce and the food and everything. And so I think, you know, there's always going to be a big onus on the author to say, like, these photos need to go together because they make sense. You know, this town produces this vegetable which produces this dish, so let's have those 3 pictures that tell this story. So I think, you know, I did have a big part in saying what I wanted to go with what, and that was really nice, because I was very kind of, I wanted to be involved, and luckily I was allowed to be involved. I'm sure the poor designer was sitting there going, God, I'm so fed up of hearing from this author every day. But luckily I was allowed to do that. So yeah, I think I like to have a big part in all parts of it. I chose the photographer for the second one. The first one I was sort of given a choice of 3, and I chose one which I really liked. This one I just chose out completely myself. I approached the publisher with this photographer and said I'd like to use her. So yeah, I think, you know, depending on your publishing company, depending on your editor, you can get lucky and have a big say in the whole process. And I think the more books I do, the more I know that I sort of want to narrow down the team to the very kind of, you know, just people I know that, and do more and more myself, essentially. I mean, my ideal cookbook would be almost entirely made by me. Like, I would love to have complete control. I think anyone that's a sort of like an artist is probably a little bit of a control freak as well. So, you know, like, obviously in a dream world, you have complete control. But yeah, I mean, it is also nice. I wouldn't say there's anything negative about working with other people, because, you know, obviously it's also nice to have other people's input and ideas and creative things. So yeah.
Well, I think what I like the most about it is there was sense of like when you look at the photos in them, you really want to eat that. You want to eat the food because it's so beautifully prepared, and it looks like it's very lovingly prepared too. So I think, I mean, you really did a great job with it because I've seen a lot of food photography over the years. I feel it's definitely improving because they look at older cookbooks and it's kind of just plopped there. But now it's like there seems to be like you could tell some time was taken, and there was a
Mm.
sense of like what is this going to look like at the end, and it really, some of it's breathtaking. I mean, my God, the cookies that look like little peaches that are filled with ricotta. My God,
Yeah.
that's just gorgeous. I mean, I can't imagine how long that took to stage, but that was beautiful.
It was actually, yeah, they were like, that was quite a nice kind of relaxed process. It wasn't that as stressful as it looks, but I've seen like a lot of people have been coming out with lots of different looking ones. But actually I think that's a good thing. Like I always think, you know, like my books are kind of intended as a guide, as like a you know, a sounding board. But I'd love it if you change things. I want you to make things bigger or smaller or more full of cream or less full of cream, or you know, gluten free if that's what you are, or whatever else. And I think, you know, like whenever people blog or post or share something that they've made of mine which they've changed, I'm always like thrilled, and sometimes I steal their idea. You know, like yesterday somebody blogged about the cake that I had, that's in there, that's this kind of rosemary, lemon, olive oil and yogurt cake, and they'd used thyme instead of rosemary. And I thought that was really lovely, and I, you know, I was like writing it down like, oh, I should do that. So yeah, I do really like this sort of feedback side of stuff. But yes, food photography, it's a real art, and it's you know, I do think, I sort of think there's a balance between styling, over styling, and just having things looking nice. I mean, obviously, you don't want a plate of food that just looks like it's been plopped there,
Yeah,
because
which I've seen. I've seen a lot of that, unfortunately.
because there's sort of, there has to be some kind of skill, I think, and some kind of presentation. But I also think things can be a bit too stylized sometimes, where it looks like it's so pretty you wouldn't want to eat it. You know, like those
Yeah,
homes,
right.
like those homes that are like so immaculate that you wouldn't actually want to live in them. They're sort of like, so you couldn't imagine yourself sitting on that sofa, or you know, reading something on that on that coffee table. Like I don't think food should look so perfect that it's not really food anymore. It's sort of artwork kind of thing. But I think there's a fine line there, and I think hopefully I sort of try and find that with my books, definitely.
But
So
yeah, I
I want
mean,
it to look, yeah, I
I
want it to
re-
look delicious and sort of beautifully presented, but also like natural and eatable kind of thing.
I really got that from your work because it really did look real. I mean, I've seen a lot of stage stuff, and you're like boring, like the Sunset magazine kind of stuff, where it always kind of looks like kind of fake, and your stuff looked really real, like people really actually were probably there. There was probably a dinner party. It
Yeah,
really probably was going to be eaten. It must be
yeah.
frustrating though too at the same time, because I imagine, because of the work involved, I can't imagine what it's like to be you and like somebody's just leafing through it. And you're like, what are you just leafing through this for? I spent an entire day on that shot. Take some time.
Yeah, I think there's like, I mean, I do sometimes just sit back and think like, why do I write books again? This is like, yeah, it's like so much work and so much time and so much energy and effort and love and sweat and tears. And then, you know, someone flicks through it in a bookshop for 5 seconds. They're like, okay. And you're like, what? This is like 2 years of my life, or like 3 years of my life. And someone has had it and done it in like 10 seconds of just flicking through it. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. But I don't know, you get like, I mean, I was having this conversation with my brother yesterday, actually, because he's a writer as well. He's just doing his first book. And I was just like, why do we write again? And he was like, and he was like, to get closer to the truth. And I was like, yeah, maybe that's it. It's like, and he was like, you know, there are moments, there are tiny, tiny, tiny moments sometimes where you touch somebody's life, like in the smallest way, like somebody thinks, oh, I love that book, or I really like that phrase, or that recipe sounds delicious. And like, that makes it worthwhile. And when people send me an email or a message and they're like, I love your book, and I mean, it really does, that does make it worthwhile. So yeah, it's a happy ending.
I think it's really, I mean, people who make cookbooks don't really know, but like for most of us that are harried, I get home after the end of the day, I got to make some crappy chicken nuggets for my kids. And, I'm just relaxing, with a glass of wine after it all, just kind of decompressing. And you look through a beautiful cookbook like yours and you kind of like, you sigh, you smile, you leaf through it, you read it, and you're like, one day, one day, there's hope. There's hope in the world. You give us hope for a better life.
Yeah, you can move to the Mediterranean, you can do it. It's all gonna be, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to. I'm aware that like it's a sort of fine line between like peddling a lifestyle which is false, because I don't want to be there saying like everything is perfect in my lovely Sardinian life where I cook a brilliant, beautiful meal every single day and I'm never tired and I never just sit back and eat crisps and drink a beer, because I do, like there are times when I really don't want to cook and when I really do just eat a whole packet of crisps and drink a couple of beers and fall asleep, and that's my evening. So yeah, I hope that like there is a kind of reality as well as a romance, and that is kind of what my favorite cookbooks embrace and portray. I do think there should be some romance, there should be some beauty and some kind of like some aspiration, not necessarily like, but it should also be, it shouldn't be too remote, it should be real and honest and also kind of friendly. You shouldn't want to feel like this person is miles away from your life. Like it should be like, I could maybe cook that and I could maybe live like that. Yeah, I think.
Now, you are originally from Devonshire, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, the Shire. Yeah, as it's known.
With the hobbits running around.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they do, like even the Hobbit. The Hobbits in Lord of the Rings. They basically have a West Country accent. It's very like it's very much true to my region. So yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of based around it. But yeah, I grew up in Devonshire, and yes, what can I say about it? Well, I can say lots of things about that, but did you have a particular question about
Yeah, so how did you come to live in Sardinia? Like, I mean, it's not that far, I guess, all things considered. In America, it wouldn't be very far away, probably as far as Los Angeles, I guess. But how did you come to live there in Sardinia?
So I was working in London, and I'd sort of been in London for 7 years, and it's I guess the sort of case with a lot of places, a lot of countries or whatever. You go to the capital to find work because that's where most of the work is, obviously, and then you either decide you're going to stay there forever because that's where your work is based, or then you try and find ways to leave. And I think I was never a city person. Like I'm very much sort of country bumpkin. I'm at my happiest when I'm wandering around, going for a walk with the dog, or foraging, or picking flowers, or just sort of faffing around in the countryside. I really do love that. I mean, as twee as it sounds, that's how I've grown up, and that's what I really love. So I was kind of, I was coming to the end of my London time, and I knew I wanted to get out, but I was kept sort of thinking, how would I do it? And then I was working in a restaurant, and it was sort of the last restaurant that I thought, that I could carry on doing this, because I was just really tired of chefing, full-time chefing life, and I wanted to do something else. And then I met this Sardinian guy called Luca, who became a really close friend and then my boyfriend. And he said to me, I said to him, I'm done with London. Like, I want to go somewhere else. I want to go somewhere smaller. I want to go somewhere quieter. I want to go somewhere closer to nature. And I want to build something of my own, or do something of my own. And he said, well, Devon for me is a bit kind of random. So why don't we try Sardinia, because I've got family there, I've got connections, contacts, there's lots of opportunity. You'd love the food. I know you already love Italian food and Italian cooking, and I think you would love it there. So we decided to move there, and it was very impulsive. My dad was obviously furious. He was like, what do you mean you're moving to Sardinia? You can't just make a huge decision like this, blah, blah, blah.
Typical dad.
Yeah, exactly. But he'd met Luca and they got on like a house on fire. You know, they were like taking the piss out of each other and having fun. And you know, I think he thought, well, why not? It's an adventure. And Luca was really keen, and I thought, why not? You know, I'd always wanted to live in a different place. I'd always wanted to learn another language. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to do it. So we did that 4 years ago, and then we broke up about 2 years ago, but we're still friends. And he's opened his own little hotel, so he's kind of following his dream and cooking at his hotel, and I go over there sometimes, especially if he has kind of guests who've read the book or something, and we'll go over and I'll have supper with them and he'll cook for us and we'll talk about the book and things. So it's really nice. And I'm kind of working towards hopefully opening something small of my own one day when tourism starts up again, and I can maybe run something small. So yeah, we're both sort of following the same path, but in our own separate way. But it's nice, and I hope that we'll always be friends because we have that sort of shared experience of moving back together.
Now, you wrote Bitter Honey about Sardinian food. What would you say exemplifies Sardinian food for people that are not familiar with it?
So it is quite hard to sort of define specifically. Obviously, Sardinia is a part of Italy, so Sardinian food is in many ways Italian food. You know, the same kind of ingredients are very prevalent. You know, the sort of main vegetables, kind of zucchini, aubergines, tomatoes, peppers, those kind of classic vegetables of the Mediterranean, and obviously olive oil, the main sort of cooking oil and fat, and the main seasoner. You know, you season almost everything with good olive oil as well. You know, but cheeses like ricotta, mozzarella, and parmesan are still used. But I think, and obviously wine is used quite a lot in cooking, as it is in all of Italy, and pasta is eaten almost daily, as it is in the rest of Italy. But I think what really defines Sardinia is that because it is quite isolated and it is quite cut off from the mainland, it has sort of preserved these very specific ingredients and these very specific traditions and some very specific dishes, which really make it sort of stand apart. So it has a couple of pasta dishes which are very specific to Sardinia, or pasta shapes. So fregola, which is a bit like couscous, which is probably a Northern African inheritance. And then malaredas, which are sort of small little nuggets, which come from kind of region near me. And then culagionis, which are kind of ravioli filled with potato and mint and pecorino.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, the recipes in Bitter Honey, they're like really delicious, very kind of homely, simple, but then they've got the mint that kind of lifts them up. Really interesting and very cheesy. So you get like strings of cheese when you bite into them. It's really good. So yeah, pecorino is a massive product here, and I think Sardinia produces something like 80% of the pecorino sold in the world or something. I mean, there is a massive sheep rearing tradition, and a lot of pecorino is made here. And it sort of is used more frequently than parmesan, I would say, in kind of everyday cooking, because it's a sort of traditional Sardinian product. And then in the region where I live, there's another very specific Sardinian ingredient, which is bataga.
Oh yes.
Yeah, which are the dried eggs of grey mullet. Which is used quite a lot in pasta dishes, or served specifically with celery in a salad, which is really delicious. The recipe is in Bitter Honey for that as well. So yeah, there's just a sort of handful, well, not a handful, quite a few ingredients which are really very specific to Sardinia. And I mean, you know, I think if people think about Sardinia, they think about bataga, pecorino, and a lot of different sheep's cheeses generally. There's fregola, malaredas, culagionis, probably vinacha, which is a wine, which is a little like sherry. It has a slightly kind of like oaky flavor. And I've put a recipe using vinacha that's really good with seafood, especially. It works really well with seafood. And then probably, I'm trying to think of any. Saffron. Saffron is also a very prevalent ingredient that's not used as much in mainland Italy. So yeah, there's it sort of does have this strong strain of quite specific ingredients and dishes. But I mean, I have written several lists, and I should probably send you a proper list rather than just firing them off the top of my head. But I can send you. I can send you a list of every very specific Sardinian ingredient if you like, and you can add that as an addendum.
Okay, I like that. I think that'd be kind of fun. Now, what do you recommend to somebody who might want to visit Sardinia? Do you have any recommendations on how they should go about it, other than not being the typical ugly tourist?
What's an ugly tourist?
Or actually, ugly American. I don't know about other countries, but we have the typical, shorts, zinc on their nose, sunglasses, Hawaiian shirt, yelling and not listening.
Yeah, I never see that here. I don't know, maybe Americans. Do you know what? Someone told me, I worked with an American, because I teach English in the school here. And I worked with an American, and she said that on lots of maps in America, Sardinia isn't even marked on the map. So I feel like maybe it's sort of been missed off the American radar sometimes. I don't know.
Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. You don't have any McDonald's, right?
There is a McDonald's. There is McDonald's.
Okay,
McDonald's has made it, but Starbucks hasn't. There are no Starbucks.
Okay.
But
you're probably lucky.
Yeah, no, I never see American tourists, which is sort of a shame in a way, because I think they would like it. I think you guys would like it. But anyway, yes, how should one visit Sardinia? Well, I'd say you need a car, really, which is a sort of inevitability, because the internal transport is not great. And if you really want to travel around, which you probably should, you don't want to stay in one area, then I'd say you definitely need to rent a car, which is relatively easy to do, but essential, because there's only one train in Sardinia, and as much as I love it because it's sort of eccentric, sort of funny old train line, it's not very practical. So yes, definitely a car. I'd say try and meet up with a Sardinian family, because the best food really will probably be made in a Sardinian home rather than found in restaurants, which I think is often the case with lots of places as well. I'd say visit places that are kind of off the map. Try and go to little cantinas, little agriturismos. Stay away from the biggest kind of touristy areas, and the most sort of famous beaches, especially high season. I would say weather-wise, the nicest months to be here are probably May and June, the beginning of the summer, and September and October, the end of the summer, because high summer, kind of July, August, is really, really hot. And for me, not necessarily very enjoyably hot. So yeah, those months are the best. And I'd say just, be open-minded, ask questions. I think Sardinians are incredibly proud of their culture and their cuisine, and that is a really wonderful thing, because it means that they're also very passionate about it. So if you show interest and you ask questions and you show appreciation, then you will find incredible hospitality and really amazing things.
Oh, I don't know. I'm thinking I'm going to put this on my list, then. That sounds very fun. I think I would enjoy it.
I think you would. It's good, and it's got that sort of added appeal that it's a bit off the beaten track, which I think is, for people that are sort of seeking something a little different, that's definitely one of its sort of things, is that like everybody knows, everybody goes to Puglia, everybody goes to Florence, everybody goes to Rome or whatever, and then like if you're searching a little bit deeper into Italian culture, maybe you then finally go to Sicily, but then Sardinia is like way down the list, and I think that's the sort of good thing for the discerning traveler.
I like going to places that are off the beaten path. I don't like going to typical tourist places, because I've worked near tourist places, and you always see the flocks of tourists. They're always gathered together, and they always seem kind of vaguely confused. They don't know why they're there. They're just like ticking off a list, and they're just all standing around, looking around, going, all right, we've done this now. Now we need to go to the next thing. And I'm like, wow, I don't get that. I'd rather just wander and kind of meet people and talk and kind of observe and look.
Yeah.
I can't imagine just like going to the kiosk where they have the thing where, oh, look, here's this and there's that, and then you're off to the next thing. I don't get that whole tourism thing.
Yeah, the box ticking tourism, I think, is dangerous. And I think when you start making lists, sort of really intensive lists that you have to keep to, that can make the whole experience quite stressful. And actually, it's like so many things, kind of spontaneity is the best thing. And the best things always happen when you haven't planned them or you're not expecting them. So I think try and keep a kind of open approach in that sense as well.
Now, your newest cookbook, La Vita e Dolce, Italian-inspired desserts, was written at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, how did that influence the writing of the cookbook and how it kind of affected your life?
So yeah, I mean, it was written entirely sotto COVID, as they say here, like under COVID, which I think is a good expression because it makes it sound like this kind of horrible, suffocating thing, which it is, and has been. And I think I mean, it was really important to me, and actually, obviously it's hopefully evident in the title, but it was really, really important of me to get across, I think, the philosophy behind the food as well as just as the recipes themselves. And I think with everything I do and all the writing I do about food, it's not really just about the food. It's also about the way of life and a way of life. And I think one of the things that is sort of endlessly appealing about Italian food, and more specifically the Italian philosophy to food, towards food, is this sort of idea of pleasure and enjoyment and really making the most of meal times and eating. And I think a lot of us, definitely in America, I know from my own experience in England, have kind of lost that sensibility, that real kind of enjoyment of food. And a lot of us eat, a box sandwich at a desk, and we rush things, and we're constantly stressed and obsessed with our work hours. And I think that kind of focus on the slightly slower way of eating and living is a really positive thing. And one of the things that I put across in Bitter Honey was that idea of sort of enjoyment and relaxation and family and that kind of thing. And then in La Vita Dolce, one of the sort of big themes is this idea of kind of eating a proper breakfast and a sweet breakfast, which sort of sets off the day in a good way. And I think during the pandemic, that became a really kind of essential part of every day for me, was waking up and making myself a proper breakfast, which may have been like a slice of cake that I'd made the day before, or an ice cream when it was really hot that I'd made the day before or something. And that just kind of that essential enjoyment, because, so many things are sort of, I think food just is it's such a universal pleasure for everybody. It's
Yeah.
something that everybody has access to, everybody can eat, everybody can cook. And I think that's why it's such a kind of magical thing. Because even during a pandemic, one of the basic pleasures that everybody can really enjoy is eating.
Who are some of your inspirations as a cookbook writer? I mean, I know that you have said that you really love reading cookbooks throughout your life. Who are some of the cookbook authors that really thought, wow, I'd like to do this,
Oh, so many. I mean, I probably read more than I should. I get to that point where I've like get crisis about my own writing because I'm so full of other people's work in a way. But I think, I mean, one of very, very early influences was Nigella Lawson, who I think almost every cook in the world cites as an influence.
Yeah, oh
Because
yeah.
I think she has such a great kind of conception of pleasure and enjoyment, and really like making the most of food. And I think she also gets that sort of emotional and philosophical aspect of it as well. And her books are not just books of recipes, they are kind of books that you could sit and read in bed, on the beach, or whatever, because she's fundamentally a brilliant writer as well as a good cook.
Yeah.
So I think her books. Then MFK Fisher has always been a big kind of inspiration and fan. I don't know, fan, not a fan. I've been a fan of hers. I love the way that she writes. Again, like a great kind of concept, like a great idea of pleasure and what it means to eat, and I think. So she's always been a big influence. And I'm trying to think. I'm not sitting in front of my library right now, so I have to.
Oh yeah, no pressure. I want 10 exact list of the.
I think Marcella Hazan. I took Marcella Hazan's The Essentials of Italian Cooking. I think it is that big Bible one of her sort of collected. And she writes. I quoted her in Bitter Honey. Actually, she writes really brilliantly about Italian food. Obviously, is Italian, but moved to America, and I think maybe sort of that made her kind of reassess and analyze her Italian heritage in a really interesting way, because I think she was living and writing in America where food was very processed, overly processed. It was very difficult to get fresh ingredients. So I mean, that kind of disjunction, when you do move countries, it obviously makes you analyze things in a much more kind of perceptive way. So I think that's really interesting reading that. And I love, who else is there? Rachel Roddy is another English writer that moved to Rome and writes very like lovely sort of stories and recipes about Roman food and her experience with it. Patience Gray is one of my old favorites, who lived in sort of rural Greece and rural Italy for a long time and wrote a very kind of cult cookbook about her experience. So yeah, just off the top of my head, all women, which is rather sexist, isn't it? Maybe I should choose some men.
I think that's okay. I mean, there's not. I don't know. It's funny. I mean, have been quite a few men, but like I feel like it's not as many as women. I think I always feel like I see a lot more women authors than men, but I think that's changing. I see that's changing now. Yeah. Likewise, I want to ask you, what artists have inspired you through your life?
So I used to, when I was younger, I was obsessed with Toulouse-Lautrec and
Oh yeah.
the kind of like beautiful pastel drawings and the sort of characters that he captures and the faces. It's sort of incredibly evocative. And I think then Sheila, I always mispronounce it, but it's spelled sort of Schiele, who I think is kind of Austrian artist who I used to love, who does very kind of like visceral, quite kind of almost unpleasant kind of human forms, but I used to love him. And then sort of illustration wise, I mean, that was more when I was kind of painting back in the day, but then illustration wise, I have a few. There's a cartoonist called Sampe, who's a French cartoonist who did a lot of work for the New Yorker, and his little cartoons are absolutely brilliant. They're so good and funny. I mean, they're the kind of cartoons where you would actually just look at a cartoon and laugh out loud, even if there's no caption. Just the way that he captures things is really brilliant. And I love Quentin Blake, who's a sort of classic English illustrator who did all the Roald Dahl books. I love Edward Lear. Yeah. I love Edward Lear, who was a sort of Victorian illustrator who did lots of nonsense, which kind of inspired the nonsense thing that I love. So yeah, lots of different kind of people.
Now I want to ask the last question. You're surrounded by some really lovely food there in Sardinia, but is there any British foodstuffs that you miss when you're there that you have a hard time getting?
Yeah, I think, I mean, this must be true of everybody that moves countries, right? I think I do. It's funny because it's not really a missing anymore, because I've made things so distinct. It's like I'm so particular about what I keep to Italy and what I keep to England. So like I'd never drink tea in Italy, for example. I just don't like it here. It doesn't taste right. I don't have the culture, like I don't sit down and have a cup of tea at 4. I can't ever imagine doing that. It's too hot. It's just totally wrong. So like I never drink tea here, but like as soon as I go back to England, the first thing I do is have a cup of tea, and it just feels right in the place and the time, and I love it. But I couldn't exactly say that I miss it necessarily, because I know every time I'm going to England, that's the first thing I'm going to do. So I definitely, there are things that I love and I look forward to about when I go home, and I think gravy is one of them as well. But I love gravy. And it doesn't exist in Italian culture. There is no kind of equivalent of gravy. And it's funny when I try and explain it to people and I'm listing all of these ingredients that go in it, and they're all like, what? You put like put wine in it, and then you put like sauce, and then you put brodo, and then you put this, and everybody thinks it's the most bizarre collection of ingredients. And yeah, you'll never understand gravy until you try it, and then everybody's a convert. So yeah, gravy, tea, butter, because salted butter doesn't exist here, so I miss like really salty. Yeah, I really miss salty butter. I miss God, what else do I miss? Like tea time things, so things that go with tea, so like biscuits, because the English are pretty good at biscuits. We have a lot of good biscuits which have a lot of butter in them, and Italian biscuits tend to be without butter, obviously, so I do miss buttery biscuits, buttery cakes, creamy things, because cream in Italy is not very good, so I miss things made with good English cream, clotted cream, because that's the West Country thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna say.
Yeah. That's this. I mean, clotted cream is one of the best things in the world, and very difficult to find anywhere outside of the West Country. So that's a big thing as well. But yes, sorry, I've rambled on for hours. I'm sorry.
No, I've enjoyed talking to you so much. Leticia Ann Clark, I want to thank you for being here on the podcast. I've had a lovely time talking to you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for some lovely questions as well. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. That was my conversation with Leticia Ann Clark. I really had a good time talking to her, and I really encourage you to read her books. I think you'll really enjoy them quite a bit. Her newest book, of course, is Vita e Dolce, and it's out now on Amazon, and it's a very beautiful book, as I've mentioned, very stunning to look at. Tune in next week when we're going to be talking with Ashley Kamora, who runs Liquefied Juice Company. I had a wonderful conversation with her, and I think you really enjoy hearing about the informative talk we had concerning juices and juice fasts and cleanses. So tune into that on Friday. Until then, happy cooking.